Good afternoon, everyone. And my name is Everett Marshall, and thank you for that great welcome from our key team. And we are so excited, my fellow presenters and my fellow certified forest therapy guides who are going to be with us today are so excited to be able to join you all today and have this discussion about forest therapy. As you can see from this slide that hopefully is on your screen, we had originally intended for this to be part of the key executive leadership conference. And the pandemic, unfortunately, got in the way of that. But this has been a great opportunity now to bring it to you as a virtual workshop and hopefully even reach more folks. And as our focus has been on making sure that we can give you more of an overview of what forest therapy is, and particularly how we've achieved some specific outcomes for individuals, for teams. All three of us who are going to be presenting are either current or former federal employees. So we also have an agency perspective in terms of how agencies can and have used the practice of forest therapy. But we're going to get into a whole lot more of this as we go through the rest of the presentation and give you some more insight into the agenda. But I think I can start actually by allowing my fellow co-presenters to introduce themselves.
Certainly. Good afternoon, everyone. Such an honor to be here. Thank you so much to the American University for this opportunity, and to all of you for being here today. My name is Tamberly Conway, and I serve as the founder and the CEO of Conservation Connections, which is a small consulting firm. I spent over 12 years with the USDA Forest Service, working in Texas and Washington, D.C. And in Washington, D.C. is where I found this practice of forest bathing and forest therapy. I serve as an ANFT certified forest therapy guide and also the director of the ANFT certified forest therapy trails program. I'm really excited to be here today. Thank you very much.
Toby. Hi, everybody. My name is Toby Bloom. Let's see, I think my camera is on. Can you guys see me? Great. Hi, so I'm Toby Bloom, and thanks to everybody for joining us today. I am the National Program Manager for Travel, Tourism, and Interpretation for the Forest Service, and I have worked in the Forest Service since 2011, but I have always worked in nature. I was a tour guide for many years, and then I worked helping develop ecotourism in Latin America and the Caribbean. And then I joined the Forest Service, and I'm proud to be the first Forest Service employee to become a certified nature and forest therapy guide through ANFT. And we've had a really wonderful time really infusing the concepts of forest therapy into the work that we do at Forest Service. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. So thanks for joining us today.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Tamberly and Toby. And again, my name is Everett Marshall, and I'm the Director of People, Performance, and Culture for the Center for Organizational Excellence. That's a small consulting firm here in the DC area that focuses on organizational effectiveness consulting, primarily for the federal sector. And I also lead a practice called Forest TLC, which is where I do a lot of my guided walks through. I'm a former naval officer, also a former federal employee, and a certified forest and therapy guide. So again, like everyone is saying, we're so excited to be here with you all today. And this is what we intend to cover. As we've mentioned, it's going to be very interactive as we start to go through this. We want to start, though, with making sure we get people grounded into what forest therapy is. You've also may have heard it described as forest bathing, and it's been getting a lot more publicity and press over the past few years. So we'll talk about that and some of the origins of the practice. We'll talk about some of the applications that each of us who are presenting have experienced with forest therapy. And then as we go through that, we'll also try and put it into the context of how it's been used in some federal agencies. And when we do that, you can consider that just because it's been applied in that we're describing it in an agency context, that could really be applicable for a wide range of organizations as well. And then the real fun will start a little bit later in the program, where we'll actually give you a taste of what a forest therapy walk is like. We've been doing, due to the pandemic, a lot of virtual forest therapy walks. So you'll get a sense of that. And that's where we hope really to be able to give you all some sense into the practice and what has drawn us to it and what we think is so much of the potential that it can offer to folks around the country and in many different organizations. So to get into it, what is forest therapy? And so we're going to be describing forest therapy as it's been introduced into the U.S., particularly through the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy Guides and Programs. And this is the organization that all of us who are certified guides on the line today have gone through the training program for to gain our certification. And as you can see from the map, it's not just in the U.S. ANFT has certified guides all across the world. And what the focus of the practice is, as it's evolved with ANFT, is really on that providing that evidence-based integrative wellness practice benefiting people in nature. So we have a very strong focus on the health and well-being impacts of being in nature and in the natural world, but also a very strong focus on how to strengthen and build the connections with the natural world and with green spaces. So I'll leave that as like a teaser. And next, what I'll do is turn it over to my colleague, Toby, to take us a little bit deeper into what forest therapy is and where it came from.
Great, thanks, Everett. So forest therapy, forest bathing, Shinrin-yoku, all of these things are kind of the same concept. And really what it is sort of guiding us as human beings back to nature. Human beings have their roots in the forest. Even though humans come from Africa, the way Africa looks now with plains and deserts and grasslands isn't the way Africa looked when human beings were evolving 3 and 4 million years ago. It used to be all forest. And so that really is where human beings come from. And as we have evolved over the years, and as our country's population is really migrating to more urban lives and spending more time inside, we're seeing increases in epidemics like obesity, diabetes, hypertension, depression, anxiety, PTSD, you name it, attention disorders. We have all of these things. And now with COVID, we are also dealing with isolation as a major problem for a lot of people. And this is really what spurred the creation of forest bathing. It has its roots in Japan. And in Japan, in the 1980s, they went through their tech boom. And so you were seeing this process happening where people were leaving agricultural and outdoor lifestyles and moving inside to work in front of computer screens under fluorescent lights. Does this sound familiar to anyone? And so these diseases really started spiking, and the Japanese government decided that they would do research and figure out how they could counteract that. And what they found out is the most effective way to counteract this kind of nature deficit is to bring people out into the forests. And so there has been, there's been tons of studies that say that just spending time in nature, spending time under the tree canopy is good for your health. And there are lots of different, evidentiary-based ways of saying this. And we'll go into that a little bit later in the slides. But just so you know, scientifically, we're proving that. And for those of us that spend a lot of time outside, it rings true to us. We may go outside in order to receive solace. We may go outside to relax, to unwind from the day. And so the science is starting to back up the things that really resonate with us. And again, like I said, this started in Japan. There's also a lot of research being done in Korea and Israel right now. But in the United States, this practice was really popularized by the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy that Everett told you about before. Okay, next slide. So what is nature and forest therapy? We already said the words are different, interchangeable: nature therapy, forest therapy. Shinrin-yoku is the word in Japanese. And so when we say forest bathing, which is one of the popular terms, really that's a rough translation of the Japanese, which is bathing in the forest atmosphere. And so what are we really doing? We're not actually taking a bath, although sometimes our invitations do involve getting in the water or playing in water. But really, we're bathing in the forest atmosphere, and we're slowing down and carefully observing with all of our senses. And we're escaping the rapid pace of our daily routines and relaxing into the tranquility of nature. And so, yes, as Americans, a lot of times we're really accustomed to taking a prescription to fix whatever ails us. And we are, as forest therapy guides, we're accustomed to a healthy dose of skepticism. But what we know now is that the body of scientific evidence that proves the effectiveness of nature and forest therapy is really growing exponentially and globally. One study found that forests promote lower concentrations of cortisol, a lower pulse rate, lower blood pressure, greater parasympathetic nerve activity, and lower sympathetic nerve activity than they do in city environments. Another study found that people have significantly decreased levels of hostility and depression when they spend a regular amount of time in forests. And one of the latest really interesting studies that pulled together 17 studies, and this was documented in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health. They compiled the results of 17 different studies and claimed a harmonizing effect of nature, especially on physiological stress reactions. And this was found across all of your body your body systems. And so researchers are still studying the role that forests play in improving overall health, but the current science really points that forest therapy is a valid and effective form of preventative medical care. Next slide, please. So this is kind of our slogan as Association of Nature and Forest Therapy Guides. We are not the therapists, we are the guides, and really the forest is the therapist. And what's so interesting is we find that whatever ails you, whatever specific thing you are sick with or is bothering you, it doesn't really matter. If you go to the forest, it will have a healing effect, no matter what your symptoms are or what your sickness may be or whatever your stress level is. And so the forest really knows what you need. And if you allow yourself to kind of get into nature, get out of your head and into your body, and let yourself really slow down and start experiencing, the world through your senses in that particular moment, you start to have different insights than you do in your normal day-to-day life. And so as guides, our job is to open those doors for you, to provide a series of invitations that allows you to really get out of your head and into your body, as we talked about. And so that's why we say the forest is the therapist, the guide opens the doors. I'm going to turn it over to Tamberly.
Thank you, Toby. And just as Toby is saying, the guide is opening those doors to sensory-based connection, to the sensory engagement that often we as humans tend to think about our five senses. And those senses are generally opened at the beginning of a forest therapy session, which you'll experience today. But the beauty of this is that throughout these guided invitations, throughout this forest therapy walk or session, this actually allows you to open into other sensory connections. Some are identifying even more than 22 identified senses. And many of these are very valuable tools when it comes to the work environment. When we look at leadership and employee connection and interrelationships among staff members, having that sense of self and self-awareness, being confident in your forward motion, having that intuition, that gut feeling is actually a sense. And so when we start to really be guided into those connections or guide ourselves, we start to open those doors to those more sensory awarenesses. Creativity is one of the really big elements of, a staff. If you're a staff member, being able to be innovative and creative. Oftentimes in the Forest Service, when I was there, my supervisors often said, hey, if you'd like to go outdoors and take your laptop or go on a walk, this can improve your sensory connection, improve your creativity, and your sense of awareness. Next slide, please. And throughout my time at the Forest Service, and again, I left the Forest Service in December of last year. However, I had the great benefit of serving the nation in this way, and I had the benefit of working with a number of medical professionals and healthcare professionals throughout the nation. And many of them are writing prescriptions for nature, for forests, for parks. And not only were they interested in writing these prescriptions for their own clients, for their own patients, but they said, we really need to bring this practice of nature connection, forest therapy to our own healthcare provider community, because burnout is so high. Suicide rates are on the climb among healthcare providers and throughout the nation and the world as a whole. So again, that disconnect often is causing us to feel, pulled away from everything. And so forest therapy and nature connection helps to bring us back into a remembering of our interconnection among everything, among all of these beings around us. They're not human beings maybe, but they're beings. And oftentimes this can help to reduce our stress levels, just being in this connection. But as well, we are being, as I sit under these trees, I'm being showered with phytoncides, which are volatile chemicals in the air that are being emitted by trees and other plant life. And these actually lower cortisol levels, which lower stress levels, and therefore lower chronic disease issues. Also creating greater attention capacity and levels of concentration, overall cognitive function. And for those of us who think we know how to multitask, maybe even motor coordination would be helpful here, but also being able to reflect on problems and then reflect on those solutions. And this overall, when we look at the workplace environment, what is this all tied to? Higher levels of performance, which is what leadership and us as employees, this is what we want. We want to be high performing, but also healthy and happy employees. Next, Everett.
Oh, thank you, Tamberly. And actually, that was a great segue into this slide. So you've been hearing about some of the health and well-being benefits from a physiological perspective of forest bathing. And a lot of my career, most of my career has been focused around how to create and nurture high-performing teams. So, my search for tools that could assist me in doing that is really one of the things that led me to want to become certified as a guide. When I learned about forest therapy, it immediately resonated with me individually in terms of my own experience with nature, but I was pretty readily able to see how I thought it could be applied to the teams that we work in. And some of the items that you see on this slide are really what kind of came out to me, not just during my early exploration of forest therapy, but now that I've actually had a chance to do some practice with it and actually engage teams with it. We know that our teams require task interdependence. They require us to have strong bonds with one another and strong interpersonal relationships. And there's a actual kind of a social connectivity aspect that you will encounter when you're having a group now of individuals do a forest therapy walk together. As they go through that kind of a group activity, there are numerous avenues for them to then kind of develop more social cohesion, which can then create and kind of help to support stronger interpersonal relationships. And some of that is also based on the actual structure of the walk. So there are individual aspects that you will experience on a walk, and we'll be going more into detail about this a little bit later, and especially when you actually have a chance to see in person what a walk is like. And we know that the individual functioning is important for a team, but you'll also begin to experience some taking the individual perspective and benefit that you're getting and what you're experiencing and putting it in more of a team context. We've talked a little bit about invitations, I think, in terms of what a forest therapy walk is composed of. And these are a sequence of activities. They usually will end with asking the group to describe what you're noticing. And the founder of ANFT, Amos Clifford, talks about that being able to kind of create a couple different things or several different things. You might have someone share something that they're noticing and you say, I noticed that too. And then you have that kind of connection that you've now made of having that shared experience. You might hear someone say that they noticed something and you're like, I noticed that, but I drew a much different conclusion from what I noticed. So now you're beginning to see some of the differences that we have with one another, but how they're tethered to common experiences that we might have, common foundations. Or someone might notice something, you're like, I did not get that at all. And now you're getting that sense of expanded awareness, right? So all of these things can happen on a walk, and they're a way to kind of help create that team bonding. There's also that notion of invitation is important. We know psychological safety is important in teams. So the more we're able to invite people so that it's accessing their power of choice is important in the team context to practice that. And the more that we can actually provide space for someone to speak and just be heard. So witnessing is a very important component of the sharing that we do during a walk. And again, you'll have a chance to actually experience that and get some real kind of exposure to it a little bit later in the program. So one example of where we were able to apply this in a team environment was with an agency that was doing a strategic planning retreat. So it was a team of about 14. It was a 2-day retreat. We did a forest bathing exercise that was integrated into the beginning of day 2. So what that allowed us to do is really customize the experience and some of the invitations so that it gave them all the individual benefit that we've described of, the physiological aspects of health and well-being, but we also made it congruent to the themes of the strategic planning offsite. So the invitations and some of the thinking and the introspection that they prompted were aligned with the intentionality of the strategic planning session. As you can see on this slide, it did have multiple ways to engage folks. Some of what you experience is very individual. We had opportunities for pair discussion and then in the group. And I think the group did find that it really provided a place for multiple perspectives to be heard, for people who maybe not had traditionally had a lot of input into these kind of things to really have their voice be heard and to build those stronger, kind of a stronger sense of awareness amongst the people that were participating that was able to contribute to the rest then of the workshop as it continued to unfold into that second day. In the context of leadership development, we've also had some exposure now to how that can impact leaders. As Tamberly showed some of her initial slides, I think you can see how a lot of the benefits can improve or can be beneficial to just about anyone, not just leaders. But in the leadership context, I was reading an article in Forbes that was talking about the benefits of executive coaching. And it was mentioning things like the ability to see yourself more clearly. So self-awareness, self-reflection, the ability to see others in your organization or your team more clearly. So those different avenues of interacting with one another, learning new ways to respond. Again, some of what you get when you really have this opportunity to have some time to really disconnect from the outside world and reflect on what you're actually experiencing in the moment. And building more positive and productive relationships is a real benefit of executive leadership coaching. So you can see how some of these things that we describe in that context, we've actually seen how the experience of going on a forest therapy walk can benefit that. I did this with a leader at a agency at the Maryland State Department of Education. And one of the things she felt when she did this with her team were a lot of the things I just described, but she said how much of a difference it was and relief when she could go through the walk and have that opportunity to share with her team, but not have to then be in the mode of defending it. It was just sharing and being witnessed, which was so empowering for her and helped her build some different connections with her team.
So as Everett was talking about, how do you include these concepts in your work, or how do you incorporate the healing benefits of nature in your work? And obviously in the Forest Service, we're poised to be a leader in this. We manage about 30% of the public lands in the United States. And so we have an opportunity to give people a chance to come out on the forest and feel these healing benefits. There are several other Forest Service employees that have become certified forest bathing guides, but we don't have enough yet to cover every one of our forests. But we have figured out a way that we are going to try and, access these benefits for our larger group and make it more accessible, not only through guides, but also through our Forest Service employees that have a passion for bringing people out in nature. So as we've mentioned, scientific research indicates a positive relationship between spending time in nature and increased physical and mental well-being. And there are similar findings documented for those that are rehabilitating from illness and injury as well. And so, like I said, Forest Service, we're really interested in becoming a leader with these concepts. And so at the end of 2018, we started a pilot program where 3 national forests established partnerships with 3 health organizations on the delivery of therapeutic nature-based experiences on our national forests. These programs benefited at-risk, well, they still continue to benefit at-risk populations, and we would have physicians, nurses, and other healthcare field workers work directly with the Forest Service to lead and facilitate wellness outings on public lands for individuals that had chronic illness, that are in recovery from major surgery, some at-risk youth populations, and also minority populations. And what's beautiful about this partnership is that those healthcare organizations also add value to the Forest Service by providing us training for our staff. And so by uniting healthcare providers with land managers, we're really building a sustainable alliance at the interface of public lands and public health. And this is an idea that's really catching on in a lot of places. And again, like I said, it's intuitive, it rings true to a lot of us, but now the science is starting to back this up. And I wanted to mention specifically one of the partnerships that we had, which was on the Hoosier National Forest with Indiana University. And this is an interesting partnership because at Indiana University, their parks and public land management department is housed within their health department. So obviously somebody at Indiana University is already getting this. And so they partnered with our Hoosier National Forest, and it was based loosely on a program that was developed on the Lake Tahoe Basin Management Unit, which was kind of our first Forest Service unit to try these partnerships. So they provided 6 wellness outings to the public in fiscal year 2019, and those were really like walks or hikes. And they had a pre and post survey from the IU Health medical staff. Those staff also provided 3 wellness sessions to Hoosier National Forest staff, and the Hoosier National Forest actually hosted a service day for Indiana University health staff. They are in the process right now of developing a Facebook page for their Healthy Hoosier Hikes. And we are in the process, these 3 programs, the one on the Hoosier National Forest, the one in Georgia on the Chattahoochee Oconee, and the one in the Lake Tahoe Basin Management Unit, we are putting together a resource guide so that all of our forest units will have an opportunity to set up these relationships. All 3 have been really successful. The one in Georgia was really interesting. It was a group called Casting for Recovery that does fly fishing retreats for women who are dealing with metastatic breast cancer. And that's cancer that's spread to other parts of the body. And so we saw benefits across all 3 of these, both for the participants, for the Forest Service employees, and also for the healthcare facilities that are trying to get these folks healthier. And so it's been a really exciting way that this intersection of public health and public lands has manifested in the Forest Service.
Thank you, Toby. And again, well, my gratitude to Toby for serving as the very first U.S. Forest Service A&F certified guide. I was just grateful to follow in her footsteps, as well as many others who are now certified. And I first learned about forest bathing during a conference in which Dr. Kathy Wolf, who is a research scientist who has worked for many years with the Forest Service through University of Washington. And after that presentation, hearing about forest bathing, I began to look up the information online and found 2 guides, 2 ANFT certified guides in the DC area, and contacted them both shortly after I was on my own forest therapy walk with one of them. And immediately I said, this is a way to connect people to the natural world and to bring ourselves back to ourselves. So shortly thereafter, the Forest Service played a significant primary role in initiating the very first ever Nature and Forest Therapy collaborative with the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy, researchers from around the nation, medical professionals. It's where we met Everett. And shortly thereafter, he guided a walk with the Conservation Education Program staff that you just heard about. And, you know, I really think that collaborative started to ignite a lot of conversations and actions around how to bring this practice forward. I think it's been miraculous how the Forest Service has embraced this practice, as you'll see now, in a variety of kind of methodologies. One is that under the Conservation Education Program, I had 3 different directors during that time frame of about 3 years who were all very supportive of advancing this work, and now in the recreation program as well, the director there. But they allowed me to utilize some funds that I had available for use with partners to fund forest therapy walks on National Public Lands Day related events or national public events and based events. Toby actually guided the very first bilingual walk at a Latino-based event in the Virginia area. And so a lot of these walks were geared towards reaching diverse and underserved communities because we realized that there were very few people in the guide spectrum that spoke Spanish. And that was one of my really strong focal areas, is reaching Latino audiences. And also partnering with ParkRx America is now a certified or official partner of the Forest Service, and Dr. Robert Czar, who's the founder and medical director, will be speaking next week, as well as Dr. Kathy Wolf at an international forest therapy conference. Recently became an ANFT certified forest therapy guide. And so we were able to fund some forest therapy activities during the events in which they were engaged as well. Next, please. I guess one of the principal elements that we were able to bring forth through the Forest Service, funded by the Forest Service and the Conservation Education Program, Dr. Tennille Bestum, with her visionary efforts, we were able to train 22 bilingual community members from the U.S., Puerto Rico, and also Nicaragua and Mexico. And this was the first ever bilingual training that ANFT was able to deliver. And Manuela Siegfried, who is going to be with us here today, guiding us in some of the remote forest therapy, was one of the primary trainers of this, and Toby and I served as training assistants. And the really beautiful thing is everybody comes to these trainings with different perspectives and different hearts. So one is actually a forest employee there in Puerto Rico who wants to become a guide to bring this practice to her fellow federal employees there at the Forest Service. Also a trained to bring this to veteran communities. Next, numerous senators who wanted to bring this to their student populations and to their school system. Magali Cintron, who's with us today as well, wanted to train in order to bring this practice to Alzheimer's patients. And Jamie Shadid, who is with us again as well today as one of our guides, had just recently been diagnosed with breast cancer and decided that she wanted to go through this training as a part of her connection and as a way to bring this to other communities in her own community of cancer thrivers. And part of this, in March, when COVID really started to rock the world, forest therapy guides around the world began to come together and say, how do we bring this practice forward? And so we developed this remote or virtual forest therapy practice. Jackie Kwong, who is with us today, was one of the very first to do this. And I approached Tennille Bestum, who's the director who funded the Colorful Changes bilingual training. And because these guides in training needed to guide at least 4 forest therapy walks to complete their certification, now that they were unable to do it in person, this was another methodology for them to use. Monica Perez, who is on with us today, initiated the pilot with the Forest Service. So Everett guided about 3 years ago in person, and then here comes Monica to guide in this remote fashion. And Tennille, the director, said, I really see the benefits this provides to our employees, to my staff, and I want to help to advance this effort. And so this is going to be moved into the realm of forest service workplace environment. We're hopeful in the very near future. And in October of 2019, the National Forest Foundation funded the very first ANFT certified forest therapy trail. And Dr. Anissa Hernandez there in Puerto Rico, who is the first guide there in Puerto Rico, is leading out that effort along with the Mission Continues, that is a veterans organization, and Corazon Latino, among many others. And this is really about the restoration of the land, but also of people, because the idea is to use this for veteran recovery, guiding with the 14 forest therapy guides who were trained at that first bilingual cohort, having access to this trail and guiding veteran communities, local communities, and also creating a research focus. And next week, I'd just like to also announce the International Conference on Forest Therapy that is being hosted by the Comisión Nacional Forestal, which is the Mexico Forest Service. Their Director General is 100% behind this effort. Dr. Kathy Wolf brought this practice to them, kind of planted the seed as she did in me about 3 years ago. And now, along with the University of British Columbia and the Asian Pacific Network for Sustainable Forestry Management, they are moving this forward to really advance this practice throughout Latin America, and also to integrate this into governmental public policy. Dr. Xing Li is one of the world's foremost leaders in forest medicine and helped to establish this practice in Japan. He will serve as one of the keynotes along with Dr. Won Sep Shin, who spoke last year at the Forest Bathing International Conference hosted by ANFT. He was the former minister of the Korea Forest Service, and now they are bringing the Forest Welfare Act into the country. So we hope you'll be able to join. I'll put that link in the chat session. Thank you.
Great. And so this is not the only way that we're seeing these concepts being spread internationally. Just this past September at the UN General Assembly, so last month, the General Assembly featured a nature lab. And basically, the message that came out of the United Nations is that forests and nature can deliver a third of the needed emissions reductions, and reverse their degradation will be fundamental for meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement. And so what we're seeing is that forest bathing is good for people, forest bathing is good for the planet, it's good for the environment, and it's good for economics. Natural climate solutions have really moved to the center of the climate debate, and they're increasingly understood to be an essential complement to decarbonization and climate action. And as we're sort of seeing this shift and we're realizing that really kind of focusing on nature and using these ecosystem services is not just about making us healthy, it's about making the planet healthy and also making us financially healthy. And we're trying to shift the mechanisms for how we do these things, because nature-based solutions have only received about 3% of global climate finance. So if we start thinking with a more nature-based approach, we'll have much more success in how we're dealing with climate change, and also how we are dealing, human beings, with this lack of nature, with all of these chronic health problems that we're seeing coming up. So all of these things are really closely intertwined. So for the UN General Assembly, the leaders of this group are really calling for placing nature at the heart of sustainable development. They want to build a green, inclusive, and circular economy, and they want to mobilize action from every corner of society. So when the United Nations starts talking like this, we know that it's really a concept that's hitting everybody. Next slide.
All right. So this has been our attempt to at least try and scratch the surface around forest therapy, nature connection, and all of the things that are beginning to evolve from this practice. And you're seeing it in so many different applications, so many different settings, so many different places. So, as we, hopefully if you've had any questions, I think we now have a few minutes at least where we can try and answer them for you. So if you put any questions in the chat box, our friends at the Key Programs can help direct those to us. But I would also encourage you to consider this question about what's your vision? How could you envision using this practice in your organizations or for yourself or for your teams, your communities, your family? And give that some thought. We'll revisit this at the conclusion of the actual virtual forest therapy experience. So we'll have a chance to have folks come back and now armed with an actual practical experience with it, see if there's been any other things that might have come up for folks in terms of, questions or what you might be able to envision. So with that, let me go ahead and see if we have any questions that we might be able to answer.
Hi everyone, this is Bree from the Key team, and please feel free to send in your questions via the chat, or if you would like to speak out and talk to the presenters yourself, go ahead and use the raise hand feature in the participants panel, and then someone from our team will unmute you so you can talk to everyone. But right now, we only have one question, and I think it was answered a while back. But Michelle asked, is the experience to be done individually or with a group, i.e. the people that you work with or who are regularly around you?
Well, I guess I can go ahead and answer that. And I think the answer is either. When we did our trainings, all of us as part of our practicum, we have to do 4 walks. And one of those walks is a one-on-one walk. You can do them individually, but like Tamberly was saying, my very first group had 26 people in it. And so that's the beauty of it, is that it's very flexible. And so you can do it with one person or you can do it with 26 people, whatever feels comfortable for your organization.
And we have another question that just came in. What response have you received from staff invited to walk in the forest as part of team building events at government organizations?
Oh, well, I could take that one, and then I know Tamberly might want to weigh in as well. So this is something that, when you start to talk to people about forest bathing and forest therapy, you can probably count on a little bit of what exactly are you intending to do with this? But I think once people actually have the experience, I think almost all of us have had some meaningful experience or interaction with nature. So the very, that very fact of being able to get a group into a green space, no matter what it might be. I'm sitting here in my backyard, it could be a local park or anything. It doesn't have to be deep into the woods or the forest on some major trek. But even getting people into that setting, it reconnects them with something that I think is very familiar. So I think people are very immediately able to be put at ease. That's one of the things I was getting at when I talked about the psychological safety aspect of it. It's putting people in a setting that we're have an affinity for, just naturally based on how human beings have evolved, that most people have some sort of an experience with, and that in and of itself can help to reduce some of those barriers of anxiety. And the way the walks are structured, particularly through the ANFT practice, is very much around invitation. So not forcing, someone to have a certain experience or a certain interaction, but just inviting them to notice what they're experiencing.
And I would also add the fact that the Forest Service has incorporated this practice into a number of their meetings and hosted meetings, a number of national level meetings outside of the Forest Service as well. And it is a way to kind of bring people together and commonality. And in the case of the Forest Therapy Trail there in El Yunque National Forest in Puerto Rico, several of those guides will be guiding walks along that proposed trail to seek input from individuals who are being guided along that trail. And so using forest therapy as a mode of operation to gather community input, kind of community engagement or public engagement tool, is also something that can be viewed as of great value as a forest therapy practice, because again, it allows people to connect in different ways, and it allows them to connect for instance, if you're developing a landscape design at a certain area at your office, a lot of landscape architects may be able to come together to really connect in that way. And they would actually probably see differently just as a result of being guided in that space and receiving some messages, say, from the more than human world is how we couch it.
Yeah, I'll just add one quick anecdote. I led my team, which is the Washington office, the headquarters of the Forest Service, our recreation team. I led them on a short forest bathing experience. We had a team retreat a couple of years ago. And I think, people that consider themselves to be nature lovers, and especially people that work with nature, surprise themselves with the different way that they can connect with nature through this mechanism. When it's through work or when you're hiking, there's a certain level of achievement and there's an objective. And when you take those objectives away and it's just about the experience of being in the forest, it surprises people how differently they can connect to nature. So even for people that spend a lot of time in nature, it's a really valuable and unique experience.
And I'll just add one more thing in terms of the pilot effort where remote forest therapy, which you'll experience today, is being brought into the Forest Service in support of this already existing partnership with these guides who need to seek some of them still need to seek their certification. And one of the comments from this particular director was that she felt like this was a practice that because everyone on her staff is spread out, they can't see one another. Normally they would get together for tea in the basement and, have these kind of connective sessions, that this actually allowed them to connect with one another through nature connection. And that it really helped her to feel much more decompressed, even to continue throughout her day in being able to be more focused and concentrating on, the tasks at hand throughout the day. So it could really serve, I believe, the staff areas. I know that they're going to offer this more broadly so that anybody from different staff could come aboard. However, it could be utilized as a really powerful staff relationship tool.
And we had another question come in before we go to the next part of the session. But do you have any specific links to health benefits research that I can reference in an invitation to engage in a forest therapy session? And are there certified leaders in the DC area that would be willing to help me execute a session with my staff?
Yeah, that is an excellent question. And I think everyone's going to receive a copy of the slides that we shared today. And we put together this slide just so you can see some of the contact information for Toby, Tamberly, and myself in terms of being resources for you, in terms of how to contact us to get more information. We've also included a link to the website for the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy Guides and Programs. That website, if you go, has a tremendous amount of information on the practice, the science behind it, the actual evidence that has been used to support it from a different setting, lots of articles and papers. So there's a tremendous amount of information on the site and resources. There's also a guide locator. So no matter where you all might be, I happen to be here in the DC area, and so is Toby, and Tamberly is in Texas. But if you go to the guide locator, again, on the ANFT website, and I think it's just also been put in the chat box, you can see guides who are in your local area, and you can look them up and contact them.
Thank you. And I have just one last question that I want to get in before we go into the next portion. Joyce asked, do you find that doing forest bathing while being barefoot, i.e. grounding, improves the body's response to the experience?
Well, I will answer quickly and leave some space for my other colleagues. That is actually one of the invitations that I like to do the most. I don't usually do an entire walk barefoot, but something that I invite folks to do is to just take their shoes off and walk around. And it really doesn't matter what kind of environment you're in. It really does feel nice. And so that is one of the invitations that we do. And I think grounding is, another concept that fits into that forest therapy. We know that it's good for you physically. We also know that it's good for your balance. And so, yes, that does tie in.
Thank you. And I think that's all the questions we have for now. I'm going to save the rest of them for after the forest bathing portion of the workshop. Welcome back, everybody.
Yes, thank you, everyone. So this is kind of free for all. So if there were any questions, now that, for folks who have been able to participate in the entire workshop, you had some of the initial information downloaded upon you, and we had that. And then you actually had a chance to, with different guides, experience what it's actually like to do a portion of a forest therapy walk. And sometimes walks are longer, sometimes especially if they're ones that we do in person. So you've got a taste of it. But if there are any questions about it, please ask us. We have a bunch of very knowledgeable guides that can answer. Or if you have some thoughts or ideas on how you might use this or leverage it or introduce it to your organization, your agency, your group, your team, whatever, we'd love to hear that as well.
So I have a question that came in earlier in the session before we went to our breakout rooms, and it's from Dustin. He asked, have you worked with the active military, say on post? He asked because the military has changed its approach to troops by now focusing on a more holistic total soldier concept. And this sounds like it could be a good complement. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Just an immediate reaction is, yeah, I think that definitely sounds like it's very congruent with that and could be, very much aligned with that initiative. And just based on my own experience, having been active duty in the Navy and being stationed on various bases, I think that, with access control type issues and visitor access worked out, even on military installations, you can typically find, space if you did want to do like an in-person walk. So that could be an option. As you've seen from folks who have been doing this in their backyards, it can be a rich experience, even if you have you don't have to, again, be in the deep woods to have this kind of experience. But I think from the virtual perspective too, during the pandemic environment, because we have to be mindful of that, there's could certainly be ways for this to be employed with almost any population, including active duty on base. There's been veterans activity or initiatives that deal with forest bathing. There's actually literature that you can find even on the Nature of Forest Therapy website that talks specifically about how it's been used for veterans. But certainly for active duty, I wouldn't see anything. I think that would be a wonderful application. Toby, anything you might want to add?
Yeah, well, so anecdotally, one of the trainees that we had in our program in Puerto Rico was a former Marine, and his idea was to take this, back to his other colleagues to do that work. And in the Forest Service, we do actually have programs for veterans. Typically what we have right now are programs where they can volunteer on the forest and they can do work or whatever it is. But really the idea is to let them do some healing in nature. And we haven't specifically rolled in forest bathing yet, but I feel like, this is something that's relatively new to the agency. And in just 2 years, it's had a lot of penetration. And so I do think it's just a matter of time before those two programs are really kind of merged. And we have these forest bathing programs and our health partnerships that are specifically targeting our veteran population. So we're on the way, we're not there yet, but it takes a long time to turn a big ship. So we're on the way.
Thank you. And a couple other people asked, can you go over exactly what it takes to become a certified forest therapy guide? Is there any specific steps to the process? And I guess an estimate about the time involved in the process.
Well, is Tamberly with us?
She might have from the call, actually.
Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and let folks know right now. And Everett, let me know if I miss anything. The process to become certified with ANFT is there is a 1-week intensive course where you all come together as a cohort and you learn about the concepts and you learn the bases for the information that we're learning, including some of the traditional knowledge that feeds into this from other cultures, some of the psychology behind it, how to deal with certain responses and things like that. And so we're there for a week. And then after the week, you have a 6-month practicum where you have a series of activities, which include guiding walks as practice. You have to do at least 4 of those for the 6-month practicum. And then there are lots of other activities about getting to know the environment around you, like your watershed, sort of a web of inner being of what are the beings that live in that area, and all of these different exercises that really kind of get you into a relationship with the natural place where you're going to be leading walks. And then once you do all of those activities, you can become a certified guide. And then every year you go through a process to make sure that you get recertified and that you keep up your activities. We're also all certified in wilderness first aid. This year there was an online course that we were able to take as an alternative because of COVID. But normally, in order to be a guide, you do need to keep your wilderness first aid certification active. Everett, anything else?